Thank you. Today's perspectives on a regenerative next normal have been eye-opening and informative. Now we're delighted to introduce you to two innovators who are building toward a regenerative future in the here and now. Kat Taylor is many things, including a leading impact investor focused on restoring social justice and environmental well-being to build a more equitable and inclusive world. Kat is the founder of Tomcat Ranch Educational Foundation, which is working to build regenerative food systems. And she's also the chairperson of the Triple Bottom Line Beneficial State Bank. Also joining us is Anasa Troutman, a visionary leader and creative whose work has been supported by Kat. Among her many roles, Anasa is the founder and CEO of The Big We, a media company, foundation, and investment fund that is, quote, revolutionizing how inspiration becomes transformation. Kat and Anasa, welcome to the Next Normal Now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you here. And Kat, I want to begin with your part of the story. I mean, your passion for sustainability and social justice touches many of the themes of interest to our Next Normal Now community. But today we're especially interested in the ways that regenerative principles inform your work. Tomcat Ranch Foundation is a focus on regenerative agriculture that, quote, restores and nurtures communities, as well as the lands and natural cycles on which we all depend. Can you tell us about the ranch and what has it taught you about the idea of regeneration?
Sure. So we take as the principles of regenerative agriculture the following. Always understand your context. Think holistically and in terms of systems change. Keep the ground covered for healthy soils using cover crops. Eschew off-farm and off-ranch inputs, especially chemical inputs and extractive debt. Encourage biodiversity above and below the ground, and reintegrate livestock into other production regimes. And if you think about those principles, they can apply to an economy, a financial system, many other things in the name of mutualism, restorative economics, and reciprocity. So the work of Tomcat Ranch Educational Foundation is to de-risk and broadcast both the principles and the practice, and now to encourage adoption and scaling. And it's so important for the many co-benefits, which is also a hallmark of a regenerative system. It doesn't maximize one outcome. It produces many that are synergistic and interactive. And just to name the few that I can remember off the top of my head, those in regenerative ranching are resequestering carbon to address climate change, restoring the quality and quantity of water retained in the soils, encouraging biodiversity above and below the ground, restoring rural economic resiliency, producing a truly healthy food product for humans, restoring racial, gender, and environmental justice in the food system, achieving animal welfare, and many other things. And we, at this point in history, should be seeking all of those co-benefits.
Well, I really appreciate how you talk not only about just what we think about as core to agriculture in terms of the production of food in this case, but also how these principles connect to a much broader view of social and environmental considerations and issues. And I think that really underscores what we are seeing now, that regenerative principles can guide investments beyond just agriculture. And increasingly, we're seeing people explore how these principles can help build toward a regenerative society as well. Now, the idea, this idea explains your connection to Anasa and to a commitment called the Good Life Pledge. And I wanted to ask two questions on that. First, can you describe what the Good Life Pledge is? And also, can you speak to how you see regenerative principles shaping the broader spheres of investing?
Sure. So I need to start with an arc of activity, sequential strategies that my partner and I pursued over the last literally 4 decades, dating myself, starting with the fact that those of us educated in the United States have to be on a journey of re-education, because the origins of our country are deeply problematic for all people participating in a good life. And we know those origins are, among others, slavery, enslavement of African Americans, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, the land theft and genocide of indigenous people, the persecution of refugees and immigrants, less in personhood for women and non-standard gender identifying folks, and extreme environmental desperation. So our journey started in philanthropy, a little bit of a false target, because philanthropy to me has come to be almost an admission of failure. If we were running society right and had a good civilization for all people, we wouldn't need so much philanthropy. But nonetheless, that's where we started, addressing essentially the symptoms of troubled systems. But we learned that that wasn't enough, and we needed to take a systemic approach to systems change by understanding the insights of actual actors. So we focused on 3 areas, which we called good food, good money, good energy. We started the ranch and the Ranch Foundation at the heart of good food. We've started Beneficial State Bank at the heart of good money, but also 2 venture funds, Bright Path Capital Partners and Radical Impact Partners. And then at the center of the good climate, good environment work, we recognized that was a political problem more than a business or scientific problem. And so my partner, Tom, launched a lot of policy and legislative work, voter mobilization, and ultimately running for president. We did gain a lot of insights about what it takes to change these big systems, but it wasn't enough yet. So we started leaning on rulemaking even more heavily to write the rules of the game, thinking about economic reform in our economy that's very extractive to shift it towards a restorative economy, and looking with Anasa's help at the role that cultural strategy and narrative shift needs to play. So we resurrected a company called Tomcat Media to engage in that work. All of this in partnership with others. And one of those partnerships led to a webinar series called the Equitable Community Economic Development Series. And we became engaged in community with community-led development efforts stewarded by community activists and with full community engagement and a community visioning process. And we learned a lot about how important it is to turn to the communities hurt the first and worst by all of those problems, because they have the insights of what the solution stacks that are effective are. We also recognize that while they needed grant funding, current income to mitigate for harm and suffering, and to prepare their ability to absorb capital, they also needed capital in the form of assets, net worth, equity. And that we will not overcome the disinvestment and theft of wealth, land, and opportunity from Black and Brown communities in this country unless we shift assets. So the Good Life Pledge is a commitment to shift 1/3 of the assets under our control into community ownership and control during our lifetime. And that can look like shifting financial assets at like endowments. It can be in the form of shifting land, like cooperatives and land trusts. I mean, we're looking at that deeply at Tomcat Ranch. And it can be also the use of philanthropic assets as collateral for low-cost financing, and to give the community a philanthropic asset to work with at the end of a hold period. So we started with 5 communities and 2 mentor communities. Anasa's is one of them. And we dedicated a $100,000 grant for capital absorption capacity building and $1 million of donor advised fund assets to collateralize nonprofit bond financings in the future. We also are recruiting other donors. Our aim is to amass $500,000 of current income for the communities and $5 million of philanthropic assets for their use. And people can join supporting the 5 communities and the 2 mentor communities, or they can bring their own community, because this is work going on all over the country, community-led economic development.
And thank you so much for sharing that. And I do appreciate kind of the historical context of this. As you started when you talk about the ranch, how context is so critical. But also looking at, a big part of regeneration, of course, is about restoration. One way I heard it described once is around, in a recent discussion, was around like healing the future. And I kind of hear those kind of principles being applied and how you're approaching this. Anasa, this brings us to you and to your part of the story. Your work is incredibly creative and inspiring, and I see the principles of regeneration showing up throughout it. One centerpiece of your work is leading the Big We, which Kat has supported, as you just mentioned. And can you tell us about the organization's mission and how you see it connecting to these regenerative principles?
Oh, absolutely. For me, the Big We is more than an organization. It's really an ecosystem of organizations, and it's designed to work at the level of culture, to bring together communities of folks who believe, like Kat is saying, that we all deserve a good life. I started my career really as a producer. So I'm a producer and storyteller by trade. And what I learned through my work is that we have to go beyond kind of the ideas of policy and practice and really have a bigger conversation about actually who we are at our core, which is dictated by our culture and our core values. And so the Big We really is built to engage in culture at that level. And so we really do the engagement of storytelling and community and practice to really think beyond what the moment is and to think like, how are we actually evolving who we're becoming, so that the things that we do, the policies, the practices, the way we engage in the economy is an outgrowth of us becoming folks who believe that everybody deserves to have a chance, believe that everybody deserves to have access, believe that everybody deserves to be joyful and healthy and sustainable and safe and have love and abundance. And so we have a production company, we have an online community platform, we have a foundation, and we have an investment fund, all working in concert together for that mission.
Well, I really appreciate the holistic approach that you're taking. I find oftentimes that, particularly with the community of investors that we tend to spend our time with at the GIIN, there is, a natural inclination towards like technical solutions. How do we find the right models? How do we scale them up? But of course, if we're thinking about shifting systems, we need to shift paradigms. And I believe that this work on that you're focused on in complement to the capital work that you do around shifting narratives and culture is so critical as part of the a holistic approach to addressing these shifts. And in these sessions, we always try to follow the story all the way through to the real world impact. I'm sure you have many compelling stories about the real world impacts of the work done by the Big We. Can you share anything that particularly stands out? Are there any stories about people who benefited from your work that you just can't forget?
Yeah, I think that the work that we're doing right now in Memphis is what stands out to me the most. We happened upon the work in Memphis. I really came to Memphis as a producer working on a musical about MLK and his time in Memphis for the commemoration of his 50th anniversary of his assassination. And happened upon this body of work in this building called Historic Claiborne Temple, which is a historic sacred Black space that was a sanitation worker strike of 68 headquarters, and was sitting in the middle of a neighborhood that was once a thriving middle class, full of art, entrepreneurs, community, and now is sitting in the middle of Memphis, which is 65% Black with a 40% poverty rate. Half the kids are born into poverty. And it's just a juxtaposition of thinking about in the height of the civil rights movement, in the height of entrepreneurship and culture and story, all the way to where it is now, and thinking about this conversation about restoration, thinking about this building that was being restored and what it could mean for it, not just to restore itself as a building, but what the restoration of the building could mean for the restoration of this community, and how we could have a more holistic conversation about it. And thinking about the model that we built at the Big We, thinking about content, the storytelling, community, who are we talking to and what are we talking to them about, and capital, and how are we moving money and resources to be able to do this work of restoration. And now fast forward, I guess it's been 4 years since we've been working in Memphis, and not only are we in the middle of construction on this building, bringing it back to life and bringing communities back into the space. But we also have leveraged that work to be able to build a community leadership council. So we have literally a group of 20 community members who are doing a year-long study on restorative economics, talking about building cooperatively owned businesses, doing local urban farming. And we've already been able to support lots of organizations in Memphis. So we've now helped 2 cultural organizations purchase property and do developments in their neighborhoods. My favorite one is this building that's called the Orange Mound Towers, which is the largest building in the oldest African-American community in all of America, all led by creatives, Black creatives, young people under 30 years old, doing a cooperatively owned economic development model. In addition to being able to move lots of money to folks who are doing work on the ground around technical assistance and supporting community members in this learning. And that to me is the pinnacle of the work that we're doing, the pinnacle of the model, which is really leveraging these beautiful, beautiful stories to engage folks in conversation and moving capital to communities whose stories those belong to, right? Because so often we see the folks telling stories of these communities and the communities never benefit. They don't get to participate in the conversation. They don't get to participate in the capital part of it. And us being able to support these folks and not only being able to own their own stories, but then actually own the economic growth that those stories are actually generating, to me, is the center of the work that we do and why we are working so hard to be able to build that, not just in Memphis, but in other cities across the South.
Well, I think that is, I mean, those are such powerful stories about, how single buildings can have such a transformative impact on communities. And I really appreciate the way you're thinking about the historical kind of significance of these buildings, but also working with young people to very much, kind of restore their presence for the future and for these future generations. And I think it's incredibly inspiring. And I want to just take a moment as we start to approach the close of this great session to talk a little bit about that future. And if you said the work that you're trying to do and the paradigm shift you're trying to drive, if it was successful, and we were in that new paradigm or that next normal, as we've been calling it, what would it look and feel like, if our society embedded the concepts that are underpinning your work? What are you ultimately pushing towards?
First, I want to just thank you for saying what you just said, because what we always talk about is leveraging the story of the past to create the story of the future. And it's so important that we are being clear about our history, but also knowing that the history is not just there to be a relic, that we are actually every day and every moment co-creating what the future is going to be together. And for me, at the risk of sounding super corny, which I probably do all the time anyway, is that is the future of love. Like, my number one question is, what would it look like for us to have an economy, a government, a healthcare system, a public safety system that actually acted out love? What would that look like? And I encourage people to look past kind of like the trite, like, oh, love, but love is a very complex, adult, sophisticated set of ways of being, right? It's not just about like your mom or your partner, but it's also about accountability. It's about equity. It's about what it looks like for us to take all of our resources and to care for each other. It is okay for us to think about an economy that actually cares for people. We must do that right now, because that to me is what the future is. All the work that we do is about us learning how to love each other through policy, through practice, through community, through engagement, through storytelling. Because that's what we all deserve. It's our natural state to be and to share love. And we need to learn how to embody that in literally everything that we do. It's not corny, it's life. It's just what it is. It's what we are all working for, and what we all deserve.
Well, I don't know, some may find it corny, but it sounds pretty compelling to me. And I think it certainly underscores these themes of of interdependence and interconnectedness
100%.
that we all experience. But I like the idea of kind of constructing our economy and society around those principles and helping to make sure that the economy reinforces those values in our society, not detracts from them. Kat, over to you. You spent much of your career investing for restoration and for regeneration. Your work with Anasa clearly demonstrates that impact and the type of thinking that you're doing But how do you think about the regenerative and transformed future that we're driving at, that you're driving at? Can you paint the picture of what you think success would look like for our collective efforts?
Sure. Well, this is just one version, the version I hold, and it echoes a lot of the themes and dynamics that Anasa just identified, and you can't beat love for sure. But I think unfettered capitalism has brought us to the brink of disaster in the form of deep racial and social inequity and planetary collapse. And it did that because we allowed it to be brutally competitive and maximize instead of optimize, and become owned by too few. When everybody owns a little bit of everything, we thrive. When anybody owns too much of anything, we suffer. So it's time for a new ism. And the ism I prefer is mutualism. You'll hear that term bandied about now. I think the way I would describe mutualism is recognizing that what we need in our economy and the way we organize ourselves in society is a commitment to sacred values that are collectively held, a commitment to just transition, to collective stewardship and ownership and benefit, and a future of self-determination for all. And that's within our reach. It doesn't have to seem so far away. Capitalism in the extractive form didn't happen by accident. It was concertedly put together for profiteering. And if we decide collectively that we want a caring, sharing kind of economy, we can achieve it. And I'll just leave with one story. Sorry, parts of it are a little R-rated, but I've been thinking about the species imperative to get your DNA into the next generation. And what a different strategy there is if your vehicle is sperm or your vehicle is egg. In the case of sperm, and this is what I would equate with extractive capitalism. And by the way, plenty of men behave with egg values and plenty of women behave with sperm values, but just saying, if you have sperm, your model is one against the all. You put as many sperm out there, you compete for resources and hoard them. You encourage competition between your offspring so that the strongest gets the most resource. And that's your strategy. It's kind of a might makes right. If you have an egg, you only have one, maybe two. And you need a lot to help that egg grow to fruition and have the possibility of reproducing themselves. So that means you need communication, cooperation, coordination, collaboration. And it's really more a strategy of the many for the all. And I think that's one of the drivers of mutualism that we can latch on to now to see a beloved community for all people.
Well, as we bring this to a close, I think there's a couple of themes. There's a lot of things I'd love to lift up from this conversation. I'm so grateful for the perspective that you've offered to me and to our community. But one of the things I'm really struck by that I hear from each of you is this connection to like an honest reckoning with our history. And a real clear-eyed look at where we come from, both the damage that's been done, but also the greatness that's been lost, and the work that we do in the presence to restore that greatness and the power that that can have to propel us to a much better future. And I think that continuity of time, that through line of our history to our future is incredibly powerful, but also in a way that is really restorative, not just to, from an economic standpoint or an environmental standpoint or a social standpoint, but really looking at how these all connect to one another and our fundamental kind of interdependence and interconnectedness. I think our accomplishments together and as individuals are, absolutely demonstrate how glimmers of our next normal are already showing up in the here and now. And Anasa and Kat, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.